Hi everyone, for today's video, I'll be sharing with you my best plant propagation hacks. Thank you so much for joining me today, and in quite a few years of taking care of plants now, I have discovered some propagation hacks that help me successfully propagate my houseplants. And if you've seen my latest houseplant video on my most successful plant propagations, these are the methods or the hacks that I employed for those houseplants. But of course, not every plant propagation attempt is successful. So in the following video, I'll be sharing with you my worst plant propagation mistakes or mistakes that you should avoid when propagating your houseplants. And hopefully you would also learn from my mistakes as well. And if you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Marian. Welcome to My Wasteless Life, where I take you along my houseplant journey and share with you some of my tips and tricks along the way, as well as some lifestyle content that is focused on sustainability, wellness, productivity, as well as my occasional personal and travel vlogs. And for today's video, this is not going to be how to set up your plant propagation, which is what you'll often see here on YouTube. But if you're interested in that type of tutorial though, I have my propagation videos linked up here and also down in the description. But for this video, I'll be sharing with you my tips and tricks and hacks on what to do for your houseplants when you already set them up, or maybe even before you start propagating your houseplants. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll be sharing my top 5 propagation hacks, and my propagation hack number 1 is to let your cuttings callus before you actually start propagating them. And what I mean by that is after making your cuttings, you let your cuttings sit in a dry, cool place. Let the tip of your cuttings callus or dried up a little bit before you put them in any propagation medium like water, perlite, moss, or anything like that. And the purpose of letting your cuttings callus is the goal of propagation for the most part is to make sure that your cuttings root before they rot. And by letting your cuttings callus first, it would help with that process to make sure that your cuttings don't rot too quickly before it actually grows roots. Do you need to do this for every plant propagation cutting that you have? Probably not. For something like POTHOS plants or a monstera adansonii maybe, you probably don't need to let your cuttings callus first before you propagate them, as those types of cuttings propagate very easily. And let's face it, they're common enough plants that if your plant propagation fails, you don't really have to be worried or be regretful that your plant propagations died. But for plant cuttings that you don't have a lot of or a little bit more precious to you, then you might want to take this extra step of letting your cuttings callus before you actually start propagating them. And for how long you should let your plants callus before you actually propagate them, it really depends on the cutting itself. For something like maybe a scindapsus plants that have very thin vines or stems, then it usually takes just a few minutes for me before I start propagating them. I think the last time I did that for a scindapsus, maybe I'd say like 30 minutes or less, and you could tell from the cutting itself where it has calloused enough before you start propagating it. But for cutting this a little bit larger or more mature, let's say a monstera deliciosa, that I have let callus overnight before I propagated them. So it just really depends on the size and the thickness of the stem of your cutting, on the length of the callusing of your cuttings. And some have also used wax to help reduce the rotting chances in their propagations, especially for like, let's say a monstera albinode. But for me, that technique is a little bit more advanced. You have to kind of know what type of wax to use, how much wax to use, and what state your cutting or node should be in before you actually apply the wax, because they might actually just encourage the rotting process if you did apply the wax properly. So I wouldn't do the waxing method unless you really know what you're doing. But if you just saw a video on it once and you want to try it, I wouldn't try it on a plant that is very precious to you. Maybe just do some trial and error and practice with using wax before you actually employ that method. So that's just something to keep in mind, and that involves a little bit more research and practice compared to just letting your cuttings callus before you actually propagate them. My second plant propagation tip, prioritizing temperature over light. Yes, I said light. I think when we propagate plants, especially when just started, we tend to prioritize light over anything else, and we want to give our plant propagations maximum amount of light. Yes, our plant propagations do need light, and in an ideal situation, you would want to give your plant propagation both ample light and the right type of temperature. But in a situation where you have to prioritize one over the other, and for most of us that always happens, I would prioritize giving your plant propagations a warmer temperature over giving them a lot of light. Especially during the non-growing season, we might put our water propagations next to windowsill so that it would get a lot of light, but it also is getting that cooler temperature and cooler drafts. And in that scenario, you would notice that your cuttings is taking quite a long time to start growing roots, and you might think, oh, it's just because it's in dormancy or it's the winter season, but really it's because it is in cooler temperatures. For a plant or a cutting to be triggered to grow roots, it has to have a temperature of 65 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for it to start growing roots. So I would prioritize giving your plant cutting a higher temperature, and usually for a season that is still a little bit cooler, I like to place my plant cutting on top of a heat mat, and that would encourage higher temperatures and trigger the root growth of my plant cuttings, especially if they are in water. Think about it, root growth does happen in darkness, and even for water propagating houseplants, it is recommended that you put it in darker bottles or darker containers as opposed to those clear bottles in order to encourage root growth faster. And of course, the ideal situation is you have your plant cuttings on top of a heat mat with grow light over it inside a greenhouse. But like I said, that kind of scenario or controlled environment for our plant cuttings is not always feasible for a lot of us. So if you have to choose between light and temperature, I would prioritize giving your plants higher temperature than higher light when propagating them. My third plant propagation hack: use a root and growth solution instead of a rooting hormone powder. And this might be just a matter of preference, but for me, the reason that I would choose a root and growth solution versus a rooting hormone powder is especially if you are water propagating and you dip your cutting in the rooting hormone powder, and once you place it in water, the hormone powder just gets washed off. With the root and growth solution, you add it to the water that you're using to propagate your houseplants, or the water you use to dampen whatever inert medium that you're using to propagate your houseplants. So for me, it's just more about efficiency, but like I said, it's just a matter of preference. And also, I find that using the root and grow solution is more economical than using the rooting hormone powder because you get a lot more product and they're about the same price. And this is the one that I use, and I've been using it for over a year now, and I still have a lot of the product left. And what I love about the root and growth solution is it also contains nutrients, not just the rooting hormone ingredients. So you get a lot more with the root and growth solution versus the rooting hormone powder. Propagation hack number 4 is not cutting my plants in order to propagate it, but using the layering method. The layering method is essentially when I have vines that are naked on top of my plant because they kind of died off because of maturity or yellowing, and you'll have like long strands of vines that only have nodes but don't have leaves, but still have a lot of growth attached to it. So instead of cutting that vine up and making single cuttings out of it, what I do is I would wrap the vine on top of the plant on the topsoil and pin it down with bobby pins, and with time it would grow roots from those nodes as well as push out new growth. It does take some time, but the great thing about the layering method is you don't have to take extra steps or change the way you take care of the plant. You just water it as normal, give it the light that you're already giving it, you fertilize it accordingly. And once you start doing that, you can either keep it with the mother plant so that your mother plant remains bushy, or you separate it from the mother plant and you have new plants. And that is one of my most favorite propagation methods to employ, especially for my POTHOS plants. When they start getting bald or naked at the base, I would employ the layering method to make them bushy again and also to make more of the plant. And the last one that I'm going to share is propagation hack number 5, is using filtered water when I am water propagating my plants. A while ago, I did an experiment on which type of water would help my plant propagations grow faster or grow better. And in that experiment, I have found that filtered water works best compared to the other types of water I use. And I would make an updated video on this experiment when it comes to using the right type of water, or what type of water you can use for your houseplants, whether it's for plant propagation or for just watering your houseplants. So do watch out for this video. But if you're interested in the water experiment that I did for propagating my POTHOS plants in water, I would link that video up here and also down in the description, so go check it out. But I definitely would recommend using filtered water. I am not a big proponent of distilled water. I do think it's a waste of money, and I also have a video on that, why I don't think distilled water is necessary for any type of your houseplants. But I do believe when it comes to plant propagation, there is a leg up in using filtered water for your houseplants, especially if your tap water is a little bit harder water, and also if you don't want to go through the hassle of pH balancing your water. Then the easiest and most efficient way that I found to help my plant propagations is using filtered water instead of just using regular tap water or any of the fancy waters for my houseplants. But yes, those are my top 5 propagation hacks. Number 1, letting your plant cuttings callous. Number 2, prioritizing temperature over light. Third, using a root and growth solution. Fourth, employing the layering method instead of chopping up your houseplants. And number 5, using filtered water when propagating your houseplants. So I hope you found those hacks helpful, and if you have additional plant propagation hacks that you'd like to share, please let me know down in the comments. But thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you're new here, I hope you subscribe. I come up with videos every week. And if you haven't yet, check out these videos up here until my next one. But until then, I see you, I appreciate you. Take care of yourself and each other, and have a plentiful day. Bye.